Okay, g'day everybody, how are you? I've decided today to make a video that I've been mulling over for quite some time and will probably continue to mull over for a while yet. It's in response to this question of brought up by one of the commenters was about the factors that will bring gold back into circulation, because we know, for example, through an economic law known as Gresham's law, that people will, and you can look it up for yourself, it basically says that given a choice between good and bad money, or in other words, between dollars and gold, people will prefer to hold the metal, hold the gold for themselves, and actually pay dollars out or pay the low quality money out. This was well enumerated in economic fields as Gresham's law. Another fact is that we also know that people in general have a propensity to hold gold and silver. There are tons and tons and tons of gold and silver. In fact, all of the gold and silver ever mined in the history of man is still in the possession of man above ground and is being hoarded. It is not being circulated. So why is this the case? Why is it not being used as money? If gold is the measure of value and is such good money, why is it not used as money? And also, what will bring it out? Now, this is part one of a two-part series. I'm actually just going to come through to a conclusion about the incentives behind gold and silver and the dollar, and draw a conclusion. In the second part of the video, I will enumerate or elaborate on what I think the solutions to this actually are. What would actually incentivize people to bring gold back into circulation? So I'm just going to consult my notes here while my eyes are going to one side. So there are many arguments and reasons why people would actually use gold and silver, but I'm going to focus in today on probably an unpopular topic. It's actually a look at the moral aspect of the dollar. The moral argument for the recirculation of gold and silver. And to understand this, we need to look at the nature of the dollar. And to understand the nature of the dollar, we need to have a look at the principles underlying how the dollar is behaved and how the dollar is exchanged, and more importantly, why the dollar is exchanged. I'm going to do this by, again, looking at the example of if you lend some sugar to a neighbour. Firstly, looking at legitimate lending of sugar to a neighbour. In legitimate lending of sugar to your neighbour, which is a physical object, you will make an agreement with your neighbour. Hey mate, yeah, I know you need to bake a cake. Okay, I'll give you a cup of sugar. He comes over, he comes with his cup, fills his cup of sugar, and you agree that next week when he's got the money, he'll bring some sugar back. He goes away, bakes his cake, eats the cake, goes down the shop the next week, buys some sugar, gets the sugar and returns it to you. That is an example of legitimate credit or legitimate lending, where a physical object is exchanged hands, a promise has been made, a credible promise has been made, and the promise has been fulfilled and extinguished by the physical return of a physical good. So that's legitimate credit. Let's have a look at an example of illegitimate credit, in which the credit is paid, and I say that in inverted commas, with an IOU. In this example, your neighbour comes over and says, hey mate, I'd like to borrow a cup of sugar. You say, no worries, I'll lend you a cup of sugar. He takes the cup of sugar away. He bakes his cake. He eats the cake. Then a week later, he comes back to you and says, hey mate, well, I actually don't have the cup of sugar. But what I'll do is I'll give you an IOU that I will pay the cup of sugar at some point down the track. Now, my question to you is, would you accept your neighbour's IOU for a cup of sugar? I think most of us would probably not accept that IOU. We would have various reactions depending on our relationship with our neighbour. But if you took that IOU, you would actually be taking a loss. And you would have been cheated out of a cup of sugar. So you probably wouldn't accept the IOU. You would actually want the cup of sugar, even if it did or did not get delivered in the end anyway. So in that example, your neighbour gets a cup of sugar, you take a loss. Or do you? Let's go on to the next example. What if your neighbour were to get your sugar, use it to exchange it for a gun, and then use that gun to threaten you to accept the IOU? Would you accept the IOU in that circumstance? Is it actually morally right for your neighbour to do that? And is he telling you the truth? Are you accepting the truth if you were to accept the IOU under that circumstance where you were being threatened to accept it? Furthermore, what if he declared that IOU as legal tender in that territory? Would that make you accept that IOU? Again, it would depend on your relationship with that neighbour. Okay, now I'm going to go on to another example. What if he takes this example further? He doesn't use the gun to threaten you, but he then uses the gun to threaten your other neighbour, who is a shopkeeper, to accept the IOU for the sugar that he's selling. And says to you, hey mate, you can get your sugar, just take that IOU down to the shop and buy your sugar with it. Would you still accept that IOU? What would be the advantage to you of accepting that IOU under that circumstance? Would you be doing the right thing to pass that IOU off to your shopkeeper? And would the shopkeeper neighbour be doing the right thing to accept it? Because I think that, and I'm just going to stop there at that point, because I think that this is actually fundamentally the nature of the dollar. When we accept the IOU, we also accept that we are actually giving away power when we accept that IOU called the dollar. And that power is used to actually enable you to pass that IOU off, known as the dollar, to other people. Fundamentally, that is what's going on with the dollar. It is not just a simple, your neighbour forces that IOU on you and you take a loss. You don't actually take a loss. And in actual fact, you can actually get some benefits out of it. There's a principle here. If you accept a dishonesty, at the same time, you also accept that you must perpetuate that dishonesty to others, in the same way that if you tell a lie, you have to tell another lie and another lie to perpetuate it. Otherwise, the lie falls over. And this relates to other moral issues as well. So let's look at the incentive under that example where, for example, the IOU is declared legal tender and under threat of force actually can be passed off to others. At this point, the borrower, who is your immediate neighbour, gets goods, but he also gets power. He gets power because he's received a physical good which he does no longer need to repay, which can be used against you and against other people. Now, in that example, you are the lender. You also get an incentive. Your incentive is to accept the dollar on the condition that you can also pass it on to your neighbour who would otherwise not accept it. I realise this is actually a radically different thinking about the nature of the dollar, but I think this is actually true about the nature of the dollar. You're actually not just accepting a simple loss in holding it. And this is one of the reasons why the dollar has power, because it can because the dollar can be passed off, has the power to be passed off to others who would otherwise not accept it. So there are other incentives which I will go on to as well. But if you look at the longer term issues with that relationship with your neighbor, how much trust is going to be formed in that relationship? Are you going to keep a trusting relationship with any of the people in that transaction? Are you going to keep your reputation? And are you going to keep your integrity? Is your neighbor or any of the people involved in that transaction going to keep their integrity? No. And in actual fact, in the longer term, even though people make a short-term gain in the dollar, everybody loses in the transaction. Everybody loses. It's actually not dissimilar to the principle of why you would actually decline or not take a $50 note from your mate's wallet when he actually leaves it on the countertop and he's not actually looking. Because you know that, okay, I'll take a 50 and I can go and use it for my whatever good purpose I think it might be used for or could be used for. But you would also accept that, okay, you would have to tell a lie to your friend. Not only that if he does actually find out that you're going to involve a loss of trust, possibly involving a loss of that relationship with that person, and you certainly will be cooperating in future for mutual benefit. So in actual fact, in the longer term, being dishonest is actually a loss for yourself. The same principle applies to the dollar. So let's extend the example of your neighbour out a little bit further. What if your neighbour took that power that he has and actually said, oh, look, I'm going to create a bureaucracy and a system of law that actually requires the entire society in the benefit of society to accept this note as legal tender? What happens if your neighbour decided to hire a security guard and then call them police and offer them up for your protection in addition to his own? What happens if he builds a hospital and offers subsidised healthcare? What happens if he builds a school where you can send your kids? What happens if your neighbour actually creates a system of religion and morality perpetuated in that school that perpetuates this activity of exchanging dollars and the system of power and legitimizes his system of power over you and your system of submission to it? What if your neighbour offers up income or free goods in dollars in exchange for this deal that you lend to him? What if your neighbour offers legal privileges, subsidised goods and other benefits available in his system? What if he offers you a job in the system? Ultimately, there are many incentives, even though the dollar is a dishonest credit instrument and actually cheats yourself and your neighbour. The dollar and the system of government that it supports offers safety, security, wealth, power, privileges, status, and a range of other benefits as well, in principle. What if you even invested your entire capital into a dollar-based asset system and you didn't want to actually lose them? Because that's where a lot of people actually are at now. It locks you into a system of dishonest dealing with your neighbour, which benefits you in the short term, but in the long term, everybody loses. So let's come to the conclusion of this video. I think that there actually are some very perverse and very strong incentives in the dollar, which actually keeps people in the dollar. It relates to the nature of the dollar. It relates to the moral nature of the dollar. And I don't have any simple or easy answers. I think if we were to use gold and silver, one of the reasons why gold and silver does not circulate is because it does not offer the same incentives. We need to look at it as the example of taking a $50 note from a friend's wallet while they're not looking. Why would we do that? And why would we not do that? Is it any wonder that people lie to us and that we are required to lie to others? Is it any wonder where it escalates up to threats and violence as well, when we are required to perpetuate those threats and violence onto our neighbour by our acceptance of the dollar? So those are my thoughts. I don't think there actually are any simple short-term incentives for the use of gold and silver, although there are some. There actually are some. But it's the moral nature of the dollar that we need to focus in on in order to bring gold and silver back into circulation. That's my thoughts. And in the next video, I will talk about what can actually be done about this at the personal level and at the level of the relationship with the people around us.